In 1982, the world was in the grip of a new fever: the video game industry. And at the top of this digital empire, one name ruled them all: Atari. The Atari 2600 console was a cultural phenomenon, a money-printing machine in millions of living rooms. Atari, owned by Warner Communications, was the fastest-growing company in US history. They were invincible. They were the future. And they were about to make the biggest bet of their lives. That same summer, another phenomenon was breaking records. Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial wasn't just a movie. It was a global event. Atari's CEO, Ray Kassar, saw a golden opportunity. A perfect marriage of the biggest name in movies and the biggest name in gaming. He entered a high-stakes negotiation with Spielberg and Warner Communications. The resulting deal was massive. Atari paid an estimated $25 million for the video game rights. That's over $78 million in today's money. It was one of the largest licensing deals in history. The plan was simple: create the E.T. video game, and sell millions of copies for Christmas. But there was one catastrophic problem. The deal was finalized in late July 1982. To get the game on shelves for the Christmas shopping season, the cartridges had to go into manufacturing by September 1st Street. This left the developers with an impossible deadline. They had just 5 weeks. 5 weeks to design, program, and test a blockbuster game from scratch. At the time, a good Atari game, like Pitfall, took 6 to 9 months to develop. Atari turned to one man, their star programmer, Howard Scott Warshaw. Warshaw was a legend. He had created the hit game Yar's Revenge, and the brilliant adaptation of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Spielberg himself had personally requested Warshaw for the E.T. project. When Atari offered him the job, Warshaw knew the timeline was insane. But the company offered him a $200,000 bonus and an all-expenses-paid trip to Hawaii if he could deliver. He accepted the challenge. Warshaw worked day and night, even building a development station in his home. He coded with a feverish intensity for 36 straight hours to finish the game by the deadline. He did it. He delivered the game in 5 weeks. Atari, confident in its blockbuster, immediately fired up its manufacturing plants. They didn't just make a few. They made 4 million. 4 million E.T. cartridges, ready to be the biggest video game of all time. The stage was set for a triumph. Instead, it would become the single greatest disaster in gaming history. Act 2, The Crash. The E.T. game hit shelves in December 1982. And almost immediately, the reports started flooding in. The game was not just bad. It was confusing. It was unplayable. Players controlled a pixelated E.T. character, wandering a bizarre landscape. The primary complaint? The pits. The screen was covered in random, invisible holes. E.T. would constantly fall into them. And getting out was a slow, frustrating, and agonizing process. Players would spend minutes just trying to levitate out of a pit, only to accidentally fall right back in. And while you were stuck, an FBI agent or a scientist would appear, abduct you, and steal the phone pieces you had worked so hard to collect. It was a nightmare of bad design. Children were frustrated. Parents were furious. The game had been the #1 gift on Christmas lists, and it was a total dud. The fallout was immediate. While Atari did manage to sell over 2.6 million copies, Mostly to unknowing grandmothers and parents buying the name on the box, the returns started coming in by the truckload. Retailers were stuck with millions of unsold copies. They sent them back to Atari, demanding refunds. Atari was now sitting on a mountain of 3.5 million returned or unsold cartridges. The $25 million bet had failed. The company posted a staggering loss of $100 million, directly tied to the ET game. It was a financial catastrophe. But this one bad game did something far worse. It broke the public's trust. The market was already flooded with hundreds of low-quality, rushed-to-market games. The ET disaster was the final straw. Consumers felt betrayed. They stopped buying video games. The entire industry, which had seemed invincible, collapsed. This event became known as the Great Video Game Crash of 1983. Industry revenue dropped by 97%. Companies went bankrupt. The golden age was over. And Atari, the king, was left broken, holding millions of worthless plastic cartridges. They had to do something with them. What they did next would become the stuff of legend. Act 3, The Legend. As Atari's financial situation went from bad to worse, a strange rumor began to circulate. A rumor whispered in video game magazines and on playgrounds. The story went that Atari, so ashamed of its failure, had taken the millions of unsold ET cartridges, driven them into the middle of the New Mexico desert, dumped them in a massive hole, and poured a layer of concrete over the top, burying their shame forever. For 30 years, this was just an urban legend. A corporate ghost story. Atari never confirmed it. The story just existed. The perfect, tragic ending to the company that flew too close to the sun. Then, in 2014, a documentary film crew decided to find out if the legend was true. They secured funding from Microsoft's Xbox Entertainment Studios to make a film called Atari: Game Over. They pored over old city records. They tracked down a former Atari executive, James Heller, who had overseen the inventory management. He confirmed the story. In September 1983, under the cover of darkness, Atari had backed 14 trucks up to a landfill in Alamogordo, New Mexico. They dumped their excess stock, not just ET, but other failed games like Pac-Man and Centipede. The city, happy to take the garbage, agreed to crush the cartridges and bury them under 30 feet of trash. The legend was real. On April 26, 2014, the film crew, along with archaeologists and a crowd of curious onlookers, began to dig. Howard Scott Warshaw, the original programmer, was even there to watch. They dug through 30 feet of compacted, 30-year-old garbage. And then, they found it. First one, then another, then hundreds. Crushed, dirty, but unmistakable. Atari 2600 cartridges. There in the dirt was the ET box art. The urban legend was 100% true. They had found the Atari Graveyard. The crew unearthed 1,382 cartridges. They weren't just a symbol of failure anymore. They were history. They were auctioned off, raising over $100,000 for the city of Alamogordo and local museums. One copy of ET from the landfill is now on display in the Smithsonian. The man who programmed it, Howard Scott Warshaw, left the industry he helped build. He became a successful psychotherapist in Silicon Valley. The great video game crash, triggered by this one disastrous game, paved the way for a new king to rise, Nintendo. But the story of the ET burial remains the greatest corporate graveyard tale of all time. A story of hubris, failure, and a legend that turned out to be buried truth.